It is an honor for me to be part of this effort to expose the Cuban regime, to expose the work of the Cuban regime inside Cuba and outside Cuba. The use of the medical missions, the perpetration of the tyrannies around the world, the support in terms of training violent groups in several countries, the support of military and police corps that violates human rights in Venezuela, Nicaragua, and also how the Cuban regime has been a major factor of disruption for democratic efforts in Latin America and in other regions, in Africa, Afghanistan, in other regions. The Cuban has been playing a role worldwide in terms of the destabilization of the democratic order. Today, we have an honor, and for me, having somebody like the Secretary General of the Organization of American States, Luis Almagro, it is a major honor for BOC and also for this webinar series. Luis Almagro is a good friend. He's in the right side of history. When you have somebody that in his first campaign for the election at the Organization of American States, the people more oriented to more conservative groups were against him because they say that he was a communist. And his re-election, people has been saying that he was a conservative right-winger. So that means that people from the extreme right and extreme left hate Luis Almagro. He's, I say that several times, he's a maverick. He goes there because he believes in freedom, he believes in democracy, and he believes in a world where everybody has the same rights. He's the Secretary General of the American States. He has been saying to everyone, more rights for more people, and he has been following that path. And the OAS has been changing from a useless organization that only responds to some governments to an organization that has been open to everyone. And that's part of the critics to him, so that he is open to everyone and to talk with everyone. He was Uruguay's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. When I met him the first time, he was the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Uruguay. And something may click on me. I hear him, I believe in him, and I supported him, and I continue supporting him in all this time. So he also was the ambassador in China. He working on their Mujica presidency. He has been involved in politics all his life, and he has been a champion, a real champion for democracy in Venezuela, in Cuba, in Nicaragua, in taking the high risk of doing that, and all several forces try to prevent him for the re-election at the Organization of American States because he's fight for what is right and against this authoritarian cloud that is killing Latin America. It is an honor, Luis, to have you here. So let's begin to talk a little bit about the region, the international impunity, the Cuban regime, and the impact from Cuba in Venezuela, in Nicaragua. 60 years, the Cuban regime in Cuba. And you have been saying that it's a failed productive system, and there's a cruel, elitist, and exclusive dictatorship. Why is that?
It is a failure, and that is the main trademark. I mean, and it's the failure of the system that it has never worked. This system didn't work in Central Asia, didn't work in the Soviet Union, didn't work in Eastern Europe, didn't work in Cuba, and of course now it's not working in Venezuela. It is a system that completely failed to provide, to deliver to the citizens. It is a system that kidnapped human rights, the basic needs of the people, these basic things like food and medicine that is completely politicized and used to assure oppression on the people. We have a regime that is not able to produce, a system that is not able to produce in a proper way, not what the people is needing, not what the people is ready to buy, not in the amount that the people is ready to acquire. Not receiving the workers the salary that is the right salary according to their capacities and possibilities to produce. So we see that how this system usually have brought a complete collapse of the society. And we have seen also how the truth is completely divided. People were trying to avoid the truth even when the collapse of the Soviet Union was happening. People was trying to avoid this truth even during the Cultural Revolution in China. People were trying to avoid this truth no matter how low the Cuban regime has fallen. People is trying to avoid this truth, even what is going on in Venezuela, the biggest humanitarian crisis that has ever existed in the hemisphere and the biggest migration crisis that has ever existed in the hemisphere. So we see how this Cuban regime is completely a disgrace for the continent. A disgrace because it has brought polarization, it has brought human rights violations, it has brought a lot of bad practices into the political system, it has brought a lot of bad practices into the social system, it has brought a lot of bad practices within the economies of our countries. It has brought a lot of bad practices to the unions, workers' unions in the hemisphere. So, and we see that practically nobody has been challenging it. First, of course, because we have had our own set of dictatorships in the late 60s, 70s, and 80s. So that, of course, put the Cuban as another dictatorship in the hemisphere. Then, when the dictatorships ended, like everybody was, for some reason, I don't know why, was feeling guilty about this leftist dictatorship that was condemned so badly by the by the dictators of the right. And so they went on. And then, of course, they have a good set of possibilities in order to devise the truth, in order to impose another narrative. And we see these days that, for example, people are trying to create dictatorships where they're clearly not. For example, they are trying to highlight bad practices in some countries of the hemisphere. El Salvador has been one of them. And what we see is that they completely forget what a real dictatorship is, and they don't address the real dictatorships during these times. That means what is Cuba, what is Venezuela, what is Nicaragua. And we can't afford that. We cannot mix things. We cannot be so unclear in our thoughts and in our political purpose, not to have clear what a dictatorship is and what one of these dictatorships is doing, infecting the rest of the hemisphere. And that is what we need to address permanently. We need to highlight this failure of this communist regime in Cuba, how this regime in Cuba has tried to destabilize the hemisphere for decades, trying to create a guerrilla movement, trying to intervene in every country, trying to bring back bad practices permanently, trying to, they were the first to bring organized crime within the life of a political system with drug trafficking and the cases of Ochoa, etc., etc. So that is what we have, and we need to highlight what this regime means in the hemisphere. There are human rights violations, there are crimes against humanity, their economic failure, how they fail to their society, how they don't assure basic needs of the population, like water, or medicines or food, and how they intervene in other states. And we need to permanently highlight this because this has to become evident. And what this dictatorship is, we have to make it evident all the time. Your phone is your microphone is silent.
Yes, in 2008, Bernard Levy was talking about the left in dark times, barbarism in the socialists and more oriented to a failed communists, and how Venezuela and Cuba, the good examples of that. And why is this obsession with this authoritarian communist practice? And there's no more in terms of fighting against this hypocrisy in the region. We know about the disaster in Angola, they know about the disaster in Afghanistan, we know the disaster in Venezuela, in Nicaragua, and we know that the Cuban regime has been failing to provide service for more than 60 years. So why is that? Why these movements, the progressive movement, instead of divorcing them from Cuba, they continue praising this regime like it is magical. So why is that?
I think they are not able to resolve this moral dilemma. They have a moral dilemma because, of course, most of them, and definitely all of them in the radical left, they have a Marxist origin, and they. Mm-hmm. And they mix this Marxist origin with the Cuban regime, and it is impossible for them to accept this, because I think the most evident thing is that how they ignore and they have ignored and they will ignore the issue of human rights violations, the crimes against humanity, the shooting, the killing, extrajudicial executions. How many millions of people died under Stalin, how many people died under the Cuban regime, how many people lost their lives in the hemisphere because of the Cuban regime actions. And nevertheless, they are not able to do that step. They are not able to condemn that. They are not able to resolve their political ideology, and at the same time this moral dilemma, and so they carry on. They carry on the ideology, and they carry on this moral dilemma completely unresolved, and they are not ready to do that. And we have seen it clearly about the Venezuelan case again, not only in the Cuban case, that most of our countries all these leftist parties, they were not able to leave ideology to handle the principles and values of human rights and democracy, not even for a second. They prefer to think together with this ideology and their crimes, and the crimes of the Venezuelan regime, and the crimes of because we have to see how much it costed them, these crimes, this extrajudicial execution, these human rights violations, these crimes against humanity, this failure of the productive system in Venezuela, but perpetrated by the Cubans and the Cuban mentality and the Cuban ideology and the Cuban management of this revolution, to say. And they were not, and they costed the left a lot. Imagine how the map of the hemisphere 5 years ago, 6 years ago. Since then, they have lost elections in Uruguay, in Chile, they lost in Argentina, they lost in Bolivia, they have lost, of course, they would have lost in Venezuela, they lost in Ecuador. They are practically losing everywhere just because they are not able to give one step forward, make one step forward in order to handle these principles, handle the truth, and be aware of that, and to denounce and to condemn what is condemnable, to repudiate what is this situation, and to repudiate these crimes, and to repudiate these failures. And they still keep going, and they still keep going no matter how how hard is the political cost. And this is a very clear Cuban principle, because they don't know about elections, of course, because they don't have a political system that confronts the sovereignty of the people. They don't consult the sovereignty of the people. And they have stolen from the people their sovereignty, and they have kept it for this exclusive club. And that it has been very expensive for the left in the hemisphere, incredible high cost.
More when they have been supporting an elitist and exclusive dictatorship in Cuba, that has been minimizing the power of the people, and really it's an extortion worldwide. So early this month, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights published a country report on Cuba, and also published another report, Freedom of Expression. Your office, also extraordinary team, your office has been active, tweeting, organizing events, publishing, and really the regime right now hates you, consider an enemy of the regime. So why that change in the OAS, and the Organization of American States, the Inter-American System, and the Organization of American States?
This commitment to human rights and the commitment to the principles and values of democracy have brought a lot of dynamism to the international organizations of the Inter-American System, especially to the Organization of American States. Also, talking about the cost, it has brought down some of the organizations that somehow rule the waves in Latin America for many years, like UNASUR and CELAC, because they were not able to get rid of that pest, and they just collapsed together with that pest. And that is, it has been an incredible cost for them, and it was just because we were confronted with this principle, because the Venezuelan dictatorship made it very evident, and it was impossible to ignore, and we had to really act, and we were all forced to act and to do something related to that. And we went, and when we went into the Venezuelan case, of course, we went deeply into the Cuban case, because when we started seeing, I mean, the Cubans were owning the repression, the Cubans were owning the civil identity of the people, the Cubans were owning part of the organization of the militaries. The Cubans were owning and practically extracting whatever they could from PDVSA to bring it down to an incredible the lowest level ever for such a rich oil country. So we had to act, and we had to do things related to the dictatorship. We had to bring solutions, and we needed to confront ourselves with these principles. And those that were not able to do it properly, they went into extinction. And those who we assumed this principle that they meant something, democracy, what is the meaning of democracy? What is the meaning of human rights protection? What is the meaning of social rights? What is the meaning of economic rights? What is the meaning of civic and political rights? How to make them accessible to the people in the hemisphere? What a dictatorship is, how it operates, what brings down, how the lack of institutions, democratic institutions, how the lack of accountability, the level of corruption can completely make a whole country collapse, because, and this is not a new system, how they export their social crisis, because this is not new. The Cubans did that. They even installed a port in the Mariel so that people could jump into the water trying to get into the United States. So Venezuela today is a continental country. They just walk out of the country. But they were the two biggest migration crises in the hemisphere were because of this failure of this regime, the lack of liberties, the lack of guarantees, and the lack of freedom. And that is what it brought us. It meant a lot for us to deal with them. And of course, they did a very hard campaign, and they have associates practically everywhere. Some of them, of course, are billionaires here in this country that they are losing some money because of the sanctions. But I mean, doing business with a dictatorship, doing business with dictators, taking profits of a situation where the people is completely oppressed and the benefits are taken from the people and the resources are taken from the people, definitely is not acceptable. It's something that we forget. I'm repeating this these days. I mean, democracy is part of our identity. Our countries started independent life at the same time they were democracies, and so we need these fundamental freedoms permanently. And no matter how imperfect our democracies are, we still try to make them work, and we try to make it possible for everybody to have their civic political rights possible for everybody. But definitely we need to work to work for a hemisphere free of dictatorships, and that will make a difference. That is, we will never be able to make the jump to development. We will never be able to be developed at the level that our resources, human, material, energetic, natural resources, have the potential to take us if we have this dictatorship in the hemisphere. It's like a too heavy burden in the back of the Latin American people.
In some of your speech, you have been talking about the repressive playbook from Cuba into Venezuela, into Nicaragua, into other countries, how they have been exporting something similar to Cuba, the tarjeta de racionamiento with the carnet de la patria in Venezuela, the repressive intelligence from Cuba into Nicaragua and Venezuela. They hear the voices of the Cuban. There is a lot of information about the Cuban intelligence operating in those countries. Is that something that is happening right now in the region?
Yes, this is the Cuban management of dictatorship. No? And the Cubans were not. The Cubans are not ready to leave Venezuela now. They need whatever thousands of oil barrels that they are taking from Venezuela, and they have always been a parasitarian revolution. No, how to have a revolution when you don't produce anything and you don't give any opportunity for your people to work, to produce, or to have a healthy economy. And so they lived for so many years from the Soviet Union. Then they were able to find another living organism where to suck and extract blood, and there they founded Venezuela, and they found Hugo Chavez, and they have been going on mounting them since then. And it has been very expensive for the Venezuelan people. It has costed the Venezuelan people a humanitarian crisis. It has costed the Venezuelan people a lot of extrajudicial executions, a lot of torture, a lot of political prisoners. And they are still there. They cannot leave. No matter if producing oil today for Venezuela is not economic and is against the rules of economy, they will keep doing so because they need to extract that oil, like they have taken the naphtha, the benzene that came in the Iranian ship. What the Venezuelan, this playbook is practically the Cuban management of a dictatorship. I mean, you infiltrate the army at all levels. You make a lot of intelligence spying within the army, not spying out of the army. No, they spy themselves in order to keep control. till a moment that nobody knows who is who, that nobody trusts anybody, and there is where they have the complete control. They try to, of course, to assure that nothing happens at the community level. That is very Cuban too, that you have somebody that reports in every block in La Habana or in whatever Cuban city. And in Venezuela, it has been practically the same. In Nicaragua, practically the same. That means a lot of espionage in the neighborhoods, every street, every block. We have a way that you can see that of selective system of political prisoners. That some of them get in, some of them get out permanently, so you never know the exact number. You never know who is going to get, you're permanently trying to get somebody out, you're trying permanently to avoid somebody getting in, so that it brings a lot of social unrest, but it neutralizes a lot the dissidents of the system. You see that they become very ferocious, torturing people. They have done so when the Venezuelan army was trying to react to this oppression, and they have kidnapped completely. They have put most of their officers down. They have, of course, tortured them in a way that it was not seen before. They try to grab the resources in Venezuela. Is clearly oil, and they do it like that. When they grab the resources, of course, they have a bigger control of the country, and of course they have they never have such an able government like the Maduro regime. I mean, what is called the Maduro regime is an emptiness. What is really doing the things there are the 20,000 Cubans, 22,000 Cubans. Some people say that they are even more. Some people say that they were saying that the amount can be even 50,000 Cubans there in Venezuela. So we really have a system that have permeated practically every part of the of social, economic, and political activity. They have corrupted practically whatever it was possible to corrupt at the social, economic, or political level, and of course they have kept a non-visible control of what is going on in the Venezuelan regime.
And just to be more well into the area of this beautiful humanitarian work from the Cuban regime and the COVID-19 medical brigade. It is really humanitarian. What about this human trafficking part of Cuba? The humanitarian medical brigade that goes to several countries. They went to Brazil, they went to Ecuador, they are now in Mexico, they are in several countries. There's a major exportation for Cuba. How this relates really to humanitarian? What is the regime manipulating this mission to generate profit for this elite that rules Cuba?
Yes, it's a very sad story, you know, and what is shown there is very bad at the human, specifically at the humanitarian level. They are supposed to be a humanitarian mission, bringing humanitarian solutions for some countries, but at the same time at the high cost the human rights of the Cuban people. They are forced to leave. They are engaged. 80% of their salary is taken away, and that is a gross human rights violation. No, that is the dictatorship not of the proletariat. It's a dictatorship against the proletariat. I mean, when you steal from the workers in such a way, like they do to these doctors that work in the missions, is awful how they operate. At the same time, of course, they infiltrate them with their intelligence. Of course, control these doctors, but to do at the same time intelligence in the countries where they are posted. And of course, when you have a crisis like today, no, you have a crisis in the hemisphere with the COVID-19 pandemic, and you have a problem there, of course, that our health systems in the hemisphere, they were not enough prepared in order to face this pandemic. And some countries, of course, they need some international cooperation, and so they have requested these missions, but these missions they come with a cost too. You resolve something there, but at the same time you aggravate some problems, and you help the regime in order to finance their activities, but also at the same time to steal the money from their own doctors and to oppress their political freedoms, their freedom of transit, their freedom of meeting. So you have a case where everything is in the way that is implemented in Cuba is the whole thing is negative. And of course, some services are delivered. Some of them, of course, in a very politicized way, and that is also negative in the countries. The cost of infiltrating the communities, at the cost of knowing who is who in every single political system. But that is also an extreme cost of these missions, and it's but it's hard to tell any country, any state that health system cannot afford to take care of has stretched themselves too much in order to take care of their own population, their whole population, that not to receive international cooperation. And this international cooperation will be the first to jump before anybody else and from anywhere else. It's an industry, a human rights suppression industry.
Yeah. We have a problem. We have the numbers from Uruguay. We have the numbers from Guatemala. We have the numbers from Mexico. There's millions of dollars invested in these missions. If they, instead of what Brazil told the Cuban, by the way, the Cuban regime, is that the Brazil government was ready to give the amount of money that the Brazil government was giving to the Cuban regime to the doctors. And what we found in Uruguay, what we found in Mexico, is that they force the blank documents, and then the regime takes away millions and millions and millions of dollars to pay for the corruption in Cuba, to pay for the lifestyle of this elite that is ruling Cuba, and that everybody believes that is beautiful. So what about corruption in Cuba? It is a form of corruption, thus?
It's a very institutionalized corruption. I mean, it's like this. The missions is a clear thing. You steal from the poor to give to the rich. You steal from the doctors to give to this elite, and it's how it works. To sustain this elite, and to sustain it politically, this elite within the country, and to make propaganda out of the country. So what they are doing at the expense of this doctor is the cruelest thing ever. I mean, and all this based on human rights violations of the worst kind, because stealing your salary. Imagine that you have somebody that at the end of the month you have to give 80% of your salary to somebody. I mean, who is that person? Why you should do that? Why the fruit of your work, of your sweat, of your ideas, of your hands has to go to somebody else, and to sustain a political elite and a political regime of this kind, just that generates the same the next time, stealing. Keep stealing from the poor, taking from the poor, taking education from the poor, taking freedoms from the poor, taking the salaries from the poor, taking the politicizing the assistance to the poor, but not giving them a right to access to food or to medicine, but politicizing that even. So it's like the worst kind of regime. I mean, they are the inverse of Robin Hoods, no? I mean, it's a dictatorship against the proletariat, and they steal from the poor to give them to themselves, to the elite.
Yeah, it is that. It's the inverse Robin Hood. There is Lorraine asking a question. I'm going to take some questions from the audience. What is the main factor that keeps the Cuban dictatorship in power? How much does business, such as hotels and European companies, Canadians, and others, helping to maintain this Cuban dictatorship?
Yeah, but the dictatorship will hold on no matter what. I mean, with international help or without international help, with foreign assistance or without foreign assistance, because the regime is just based on the indiscriminate use of violence and the use of these tools like political prisoners, torture, executions, and of course very scientific and methodological way of controlling every single community in the country, infiltrating the army and doing espionage to themselves. It's something that has been permanent for quite long. So, and they evacuate the social pressure. When they have a social crisis, they just let people go, or they make people go, or they force people to go. The forced exile is a punishment in Cuba. It's something that has been happening for many years. So, yeah, there are some cases. Of course, I have mentioned that there are, of course, some billionaires that they would prefer to have business these days with Cuba, and they feel that some other companies from other countries are taking advantage of that. But the only one that is taking advantage is the regime, and everybody should know it by what it is. This regime kidnapping freedoms and doing repression against the people is the main they receive most of the benefits of this international foreign aid or assistance. And it will be difficult. And they have created a very proper narrative, and we have seen that narrative before. And we have seen this narrative lately also. Imagine that the sanctions against Venezuela were not even implemented, and they were already guilty of the humanitarian crisis that started 4 years before. So imagine that this narrative is permanently permeating in the mainstream of press here in the United States and press everywhere. And you see some studies that they pretend to be scientific, and they are not scientific at all. They are big lies, and they are lies that the Cuban and the Venezuelan people have paid for it, because of course it's money of the regime, and the money of the regime comes from the people and from the resources of the people and from the welfare of the people, and they just keep going, and that this narrative is permanent, and they try to create everybody's guilty, no, except themselves. Everybody's guilty. They are like they have been acting responsibly in the always, and that is clearly not the case.
It is, yes. It is. Everybody's guilty. This regime.
Lies are amazing. I mean, they are.
No, it's amazing.
Always, they're not able to produce anything. Imagine, they are not able to create anything. Their innovations is completely collapsing and going. It has gone down since the revolution, and And there they are, still
No,
selling
that they are good creating conspiracy theory. They are really creating enemies and creating violence and repression. They are good in that.
Dividing the truth, dividing the society, dividing
Yeah.
the political system, polarizing, and all these bad practices are permanently permeating into every system.
No. I knew Chavez. I had talked with Chavez years and years ago when he was just a candidate, and I knew from day one he was bad news. And you know that they only want power, and the rest it's useless, and the rest of the people is useless. And they begin to create this narrative about the poor regime that cannot move forward, and instead of people around the world fighting against the discrimination against the Venezuelan, the Cubans, the Nicaraguans oppressed by this regime, they are getting along with this regime and supporting these groups because it is the way to be a progressive and thinking against the U.S. It is what you say. They create this weird narrative here.
Yes. Everybody is guilty except themselves for whatever kind of, no matter. For example, let's to analyze the Cuban system. I mean, we have to go to 1959. I was not born. You were not born either. I mean, it's going back in history. I mean, who knows how Cuba was in 1959? It is just what they say. It is their narrative about what Cuba was in 1959. They try to create also a mythology of the guerrillero, and that it was something that is the most insane thing, but it's the most immoral thing. They were not in favor of any guerrilla unless they were subordinated to them. For example, they had big problems with the Tupamaros in Uruguay. And they divided the Tupamaros even when they were already in jail with 6 points. They brought a lot of internal divisions. They tried to co-opt the movement. And of course, they forced a reaction of that. They were always a negative force practically in every system, but that negative force also we see it in what we have said about the way that they structure the functioning of economy and social life in every country. That is what has brought every country to a whole collapse.
We have other questions or other comments here for you. A couple of them is about Ariel Ruiz Urquiola and his fight and his fight for Cuba. So how the OAS is involved or is planning to get involved in his case?
I was about to issue a communication related to his case, that his case deserved to be listened, and he's denounced deserved to be processed. And it is not, it's to make this denounced silent and not to be processed by international community is one of the ways that the Cuban regime pervert the truth or divide the truth or try to bring down the truth of these cases. It's like some years ago, it must be valid till now, it was in Venezuela was declared illegal for the doctors to put as cause of death starvation. And it was a way of dealing with the starvation, just you deny it. And this is the way that the Cuban regime works. I mean, you deny everything. This is not, you make it illegal. You make it, this didn't happen. And of course, you try to block this, and that is a real blockade, not the other what they announced a blockade that those are sanctions and embargo. This is a real blockade, the blockade of the truth. When they block people that is going to denounce them, into the justice or in every country or to international organizations. That these people, they don't have access for them to make it possible. And that is what we should be able to pick up this truth, and we should be able to make this truth evident for everybody, and that should be our work.
There is another comment here from Chantal. She says that the American from left and right has been more alive than ever, but Mano Dura is alive as well, and is growing in everywhere. And what resources does the OAS need to implement or to preserve the promise of the democratic charter to the people?
Yeah, we have to see this. These are time of COVID-19. No, I mean, practically every single country in the hemisphere has had to implement measures restricting freedom of transit, meeting, association, demonstrations because of the pandemic. They have even had to postpone elections. So that is a different story, and we need to see how the dust goes down, how the dust settles down, to see if some of these extraordinary measures are still there after the COVID-19. We expect that these measures will last just as they are necessary in order to implement these the most proper measures to fight COVID-19. We have to also be aware that it's different a democracy than a dictatorship. We have to have clear where the dictatorships are and the tools that the democracies have. Most of these measures that have been implemented in our countries, in most of our countries, are measures based on two things. That is, one of them is the democratic rule of law. That means you have tools how to make possible your guarantees, how to fight for your rights, and how to make possible that your rights are recognized by the state or by the administration. And at the same time, the public order. Public order is a concept too. And these two concepts combined, of course, they give possibilities and tools in order to fight this pandemic. But to implement measures related to public order, because you need to fight COVID-19 is one thing, and to put political prisoners to fight COVID-19, that is a different story. And to torture these prisoners to fight COVID-19, that it doesn't exist as a health measure. To bring down solutions and accountability for is completely out of question. It should be out of question in the democratic society. So we need a strong democratic institutions these days, and that is very relevant. And we need efficient democratic institutions. And about the extraordinary measures that have been implemented, we need to see if they are still in place when after this pandemic, COVID-19 is over. And we cannot, because of that, get it wrong where the dictatorships are and try to mix democratic societies and democratic systems with a dictatorship, because measures that have been implemented in order to fight the pandemic. That could be a silly mistake.
That's true. I have here a question, but it is more for us, but BOC, that they ask about the specific steps to for those outside Cuba that can help the Cuba achieve human rights and democracy in our side in BOC, and that's why we partner with Secretary General Almagro, and we partner with USA, we partner with different organizations, we partner with different Cuban groups, we partner also with the extraordinary people that has been fighting for Cuba, we decided, I have been working for freedom in Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua for the last 25 years. For Venezuela, 20-something, Nicaragua, a lot of years, a couple of decades, 15 years, Cuba, several years, several decades by now. And it's always about training and training and training. So we changed the approach. And now we're looking for the money, following the corruption, exposure of the real nature of the regime. In VOC, we also educating. Murray has we have some program, excellent program about educating U.S. about the real communist threat and exposing what is there, what is the real regime, tearing down the false narrative from these regimes, and also we don't believe in self-proclaimed heroes from the opposition either. So we are exposing everyone, and we are fighting for the rights of everyone to fight against this regime. And that's why we partner with Almagro, and we find immediate connection to do this maverick fight for all this time. So what we can do to expose it, and what we can do to fight against this regime in Cuba, Luis?
First, we have to keep in mind and permanently denounce the unpaid bills of the Cuban regime. That means executions, that means torture, that means political prisoners. All these systematic human rights violations, all these crimes against humanity, we have to permanently expose them. We have to expose the destabilization that they brought to most of the countries of the hemisphere. We have to denounce it, make it evident, how it happened, why they did it, what was their profit. We have to make evident their connections to drug trafficking. They have been the first state to do drug trafficking.
Oh, yeah.
Ochoa, of course, at the end worked as a scapegoat, but it was clearly the machinery of the regime doing drug trafficking. Then came Noriega, and then came the Venezuelan regime. But it is sort of strange that most of these guerrilla movements, for example, all these associates, ELN, FARC, or FARC dissidents now, the Venezuelan regime, that means that Maduro, etc., etc. All of them, they have all of them, they have connections to drug trafficking, and they have been doing drug trafficking for quite a while, and they have been denounced for drug trafficking for this. And the Cubans that they are associated, business partners, political partners in all this, they have not done it. No, come on, that is not serious. That is not serious, and we have to follow the corruption. Odebrecht did corruption everywhere. Corruption in practically every country in the hemisphere, except in Cuba, that they built a port, and they were there. I mean, that's insane. So their corruption, of course, is institutionalized. They steal from the people. They steal from, and they keep getting themselves richer and richer. And we have to, of course, the accountability of their present failures. What we said, I mean, this system has never worked. It didn't work in the Soviet Union, didn't work in Central Asia, didn't work in Eastern Europe, and it didn't work in Cuba, and it didn't work in Venezuela. And Venezuela brought down a very, very, very rich country, rich in mineral resources, rich in energetic resources, rich in natural resources. They are not able to assure the basic social and economic rights to people. They cannot assure a decent salary to the people, a salary from which the people can live. They take from that salary, they steal from that salary. In fact, as we say, for example, about emissions. At the same time, they are not able to, they have not been able during the special period in Cuba, and they have not been, they created a humanitarian crisis there. and they have not been able in Venezuela. They created another humanitarian crisis with 7 million people in risk of hunger. They were not able to assure food for everybody. Um, they cannot assure medicine for everybody. They have their health system completely collapsed, and nevertheless they export because of propaganda. They are these medical missions. So we have many issues that we have to present, to make evident in order to denounce the Cuban regime. But crimes against humanity. I mean, Fidel Castro is not better than Videla. He killed more people than Videla, in fact. He disappeared more people than Videla. What is that? How we can afford to recognize somebody like that? How somebody like that can be recognized by any political party in the hemisphere? I don't see anybody in the right recognizing Videla for his crimes, but yeah, some are fool enough in order to recognize Fidel Castro and his crimes, and they try to deny them. And he killed more people, tortured more people than these dictatorships. And they have to pay the same that other dictators paid. They have to pay the same price that other dictators paid. These crimes shouldn't be impugned. Corruption shouldn't be impugned. Crimes against humanity can't be impugned. We have to make it possible to go against them, and we have to do it.
No, and we have to keep fighting. That's why it's an open call for everyone to join our effort, to join the Secretary General, to join the OAS, even though it's a complicated fight. It almost cost you your re-election because of your fight for this, and they oppose your re-election from the high hierarchy.
They did a very hard campaign. They did here.
The hard campaign from the Catholic Church to some countries, to some major funders, to countries, and they try really hard. That is the best thing that you won, even against.
Yes, victory in many ways. It proves that we are moving in the right direction, that hemisphere has moved in the right direction. It wouldn't have been possible to win. And when I was Minister of Foreign Affairs of Uruguay, I lost against them for a place in the Human Rights Council. I lost against Cuba for a seat. Uruguay lost a seat against Cuba for the Human Rights Council. So this victory is something special, because some years ago it wouldn't have been possible, and we wouldn't have exposed them the way that we have exposed them in the past years. Wouldn't have been possible.
There is Andy Santana. I think that this is the last one. We're almost getting to the end. Andy Santana from the Otaola program. Right? You had like we were counting. We were talking about this program. Hey, we're gonna have like 2,000 people, and we had like 200,000 people. Hey, amazing!
120,000 people. Yeah, amazing.
And more than 200,000 people watch the video online. So. They're asking for if it's possible to think about a free point of internet access for Cuba. Well, this is more technical. Yeah, this is more technical. A free free point of access to internet in Cuba. That is more technical. Yeah.
Yeah, we have to try. We
have to continue trying and look for the technology, or friends from different agencies from USA that maybe think about new strategies to keep the pressure on the regime. Well, Secretary General, it is a pleasure for me. It has been a pleasure for me. I enjoy this discussion. I hope that we can continue with this and continue the fight. So the last minute is your last word. Just what do you want for people to know in Venezuela, in Nicaragua, and in Cuba?
That we are fighting for a hemisphere free of dictatorships. And we are going to achieve it. That democracy and human rights is part of the Latin American identity, and it's part of our identity in the continent. and that we are ready to give the best and to keep denouncing and keep proposing solutions and keep walking through all possible obstacles. We are ready to face every possible obstacle. We are ready to face the most criminal accusations and lies of the regime. We are ready to put up a fight in order to have democracy everywhere in the hemisphere.
Thank you very much, and I hope that everybody joins our battle. It doesn't have to deal with left and right. It's a deal for more rights for more people and having what is right there, the fighting for freedom everywhere. Thank you very much. In the name of Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, thanks to all of you for watching us today. And remember, this is going to be available also in YouTube, in our YouTube page. So please recommend this program to your friends and colleagues and everyone. Thank you, my friend Luis Almagro, for being here. See you around.
See you around. See you around.